And good morning. Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Fiber to Residential Complexes. My name is Chad Hines, Chair of APOLAN's Technology Committee, and I'll be your moderator today. Today we will be discussing how the use of fiber optics for residential complexes such as senior living facilities, student housings, apartment buildings, and multi-dwelling units offer several advantages over traditional networks and ISP services. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. To limit background noise during the presentation, audio has been muted today for everyone except our presenters. We will save time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions. Please use the chat feature on your screen to submit questions throughout the presentation. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible after the conclusion of the presentation. The slide deck will be emailed to registrants after completion of the webinar and include information about APOLAN's benefits, resources, and contact information. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay on APOLAN's YouTube channel. Now let's meet your presenter, Scott McIsaac. Scott is a technical account manager with Tellabs and a member of APOLAN's Technology Committee. On the next two slides, you will see the antitrust and disclaimer slides. These will be a part of the slide deck we will send out after completion of the webinar, so we won't spend a lot of time on them. Scott, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to you to get started.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit about WIFI, how did things get started, what you might see as different today, and the potential for growth and scalability, as well as security and a variety of services, whether being managed or not, is beneficial to you and your communities. So some of the things that we see based on global requirements, there's definitely new demands and initiatives that are driving needs. Managed services, I think, become key for a lot of people because customers are demanding more. And what makes the community that you're supporting better or more diverse than any other community, being able to offer a variety of over-the-top type services rather than just traditional broadband kind of becomes key to attracting the right clients in and making sure the property's full. I think with a lot of investment companies out there today buying up these larger type properties or offering the senior living, as Chad had mentioned, as well as the school campuses, it's all about that experience that the individuals can get. There's definitely a demand for kind of a Wi-Fi everywhere kind of service out there, being constantly connected. Everybody's got that portable device and they need to be connected at all times. But going along with that in a larger campus type environment or complex, there's definitely the security aspects that I think become key to a lot of people. And you see more demand as we work with different school systems and the senior living communities. Security is huge for them, and it's really on an individual basis as well, trying to help monitor their location to keep them safe, especially if it's a senior living type aspect. People tend to wander off, so being able to do RFIDs, watches or something with them kind of helps being able to have better broadband solutions out there. And with these different needs, it's kind of driven more demand for new providers and new solutions, not just the traditional ISP today, but even the ISPs have really had to step up their game to provide broadband everywhere. So seeing that growth and that demand, it's really driven new demand for new providers to step up and create the new solutions. And I think you'll see that passive optical networking can really provide those solutions for you. So when we kind of look back to, where, for me anyways, where I feel that things really got going well was when we started doing projects like Verizon Fios, AT&T Uverse, Xfinity, bringing services closer to the end user and really starting to densely populate areas. And when you look back, it's really simplistic, especially from a passive optical networking perspective, where they traditionally did a central office in a town feeding all the residents in that town, and you got what felt like unlimited reach. There are some limitations to the network, but when you're looking at 12 miles to 18 miles worth of reach to provide services above and beyond what people were used to years ago, I think it's pretty amazing. And now you see all the newer applications that come out because of that. What can I provide over the top, whether it's a streaming service, whether it's, these Teams meetings that you're trying to have. And I think COVID really kind of proved to people what you can do from home, what you can do from anywhere. So having broadband experiences improve the workforce and improve the educational environment. You didn't have to travel as much. So it kind of changed the dynamic of where things can go. So very simplistic by adding fiber throughout a network, putting passive components in the middle of the network wherever they need to go or can go, and you get tons of flexibility behind that. If things can be provided aerially over fiber out to a house to an ONT, or underground feeding different business complex and again schools and other malls, if you will. It's the applications to me are kind of limitless on where you can and need to go. So seeing these things really take off in the early 2000s, the industry looked at and said, well, what more can you do it? So you're looking at, from this picture, on a wide area basis, I'm providing from a central office out to individuals. Well, now things are kind of morphing more into the, why does it have to just be individuals? Why can't I build a network upon a network? So you may be using that ISP to provide broadband services into a complex like this, where you see multi-tenant facilities, multiple buildings being tied together within a network. So you're creating a LAN on top of the WAN. So now I've brought broadband in, everybody can get the access and the speeds that they need, but now you can also offer the Wi-Fi everywhere, the security cameras, the security gates, the over-the-top services that you just didn't see or have before. And I think, Chad will probably agree with me on this as well. From a managed type perspective, the quality of the service and the quality of the response time can improve as well. So you're giving the customers what they really want. What's going to make your complex, your community more attractive than somebody else's? You want to bring tenants in and have huge fill rates, offer them the services that they're going to need and want on a daily basis. And those complexes can be just about anything. This example here is a senior living style, apartment style type community where, originally this could have been a Marriott Resident Inn that got converted into a senior living type community. There's a lot of investments happening in the real estate community today where they're looking for these apartment style complexes where they can make great returns on their investments, and they're looking for features that are going to help push that further and further down the road and bring in more people, because fill rate's key, right? If I have an empty apartment building, your profits are being cut into. So the better you can fill, the better the profits are for everybody involved. Keep looking at those complexes. This example here happens to be a friendly environment that we do quite a bit of business with. And it could be any type of senior living complex, but you see the breadth of it, the size of the buildings and the distance that it encompasses. So not only are you now finding maybe a centralized location within one of these buildings that can be that data, geez, there's my Boston accent again, that data center type environment where I can kind of control everything that comes into the complex. and then be able to pass it out with feature-rich accessories or applications to kind of go over top of that. How do I want to drive digital signage? How do I want to drive Wi-Fi everywhere? Security cameras, gates. But a lot of it's just from that community aspect of the information and tying people together to letting them know what's going on in the community, trying to keep people up to date, where you wouldn't traditionally get that from just an ISP type service, and maybe the ISPs themselves can kind of latch on to this as well. Originally when we started doing things like, FiOS deployments, they would go in and put mini duct into every room in these buildings and pull fiber in, and every customer was treated as an individual, which is great, but you miss out on all the added benefits from a managed type service. We look at other communities like this going up called the Uncommons. It's a 40-acre mixed use community. So really, what's a mixed use community? It's not just residential housing anymore, right? There's going to be businesses on the lower levels of these things helping to drive revenue, and again, make it feature rich for the people that want to have residences here. This could be any campus in the world from a college perspective as well. When you look at a building like this, almost every college campus that I've been on and driven by, there's storefronts in the bottoms of almost every one of the student housings. They're trying to make, I don't want you to have to go out and leave the community and drive forever or wait for somebody to bring goods and services in. They want the goods and services right there, as close as possible. So everything's within reach, and being able to provide broadband services to those consumers and business owners as well helps boost and attract more people coming in. Students do college tours all the time before they pick the college they want, and it's trying to find that comfort level, all those additional feature rich activities that they may not have been able to enjoy elsewhere. And you may look at communities from just like this example, single family gated communities. I want security. I'm buying a higher end home. I want additional, cameras, card readers, whatever that case may be. This could be digital signage as well, broadcasting the name of the community as well as what's happening in the community today. There's just more demand. So bringing it from simple broadband into that feature rich broadband, what kind of applications, I guess, really can't you do would be the shorter list, right? So it's the over the top services as they move forward. There's communities like this. I'm up in the Boston area, and this is an old racetrack it's being converted over from that racetrack usage now into a nice mixed environment, tons of apartment buildings, tons of businesses. Again, there's that, you don't want dead spots. So is it 5G services that are being offered, like DAS systems within the buildings, trying to help with those overlays? Or is it creating Wi-Fi everywhere for the different consumers to use? Turning something that was old and run down into something new, and getting, tens of thousands of housing units added into this. I mentioned before in one of the first slides, an old resident inn, because there's a town up in my area that just recently got approval to convert a Marriott Residence Inn into apartment units for different usage within that town, instead of just having it as a hotel that was starting to get run down, maybe not seeing the turn that they needed. But affordable housing is key. And, if you can offer affordable housing with the extra features and services, again, trying to attract people in, making it better for the investors that go in here, the management companies that go in here, whatever the case that may be for you. And you look at some of the things that are being created today, even from a digital signage perspective, information's key. I've got it readily accessible on my handheld in the example down below. So just walking into that building, it can address the consumers that are there, letting them know with different splash screens, what's available in that community, within that building. We're working on projects where different providers are trying to turn their whole complex into what looks like old Italy, kind of a Tuscan village kind of aspect. And when you get onto their Wi-Fi that's there, they want to be able to show you all the different providers that are located. So you get a nice menu of selections of things, and it brings you into that real-time information of what's going on without you having to go searching. Just makes the search life even faster, quicker, and easier. And then for the older users that may not have the device, or your device battery died, that signage is all interactive. As you can see here, the individuals hitting the touchscreen and finding what they want. And we see this in airports today. So why not in the buildings? Why not in the complexes themselves? Extend that information reach as far as you can. Providers are building new devices like these light poles out there using LED lighting that could be powered by PoE if need be, cellular antennas to get better cellular services for 5G and beyond, different environmental sensors, cameras for surveillance, car chargers, different display panels, or again, it just could be Wi-Fi kind of pointing everywhere. But now you've got this one post that has a multitude of services being provided off of it that you didn't see before. And those devices demand bandwidth. So being able to reach out to a device like this with a small piece of equipment like an optical network terminal that can fit in the base of this housing versus having to put a full-blown cabinet in worth of Ethernet equipment and multi-mode fiber and short reach copper. You're bringing fiber and services as close to that end user device as you can possibly get, which helps improve that experience for all the users in that environment. This is one of my favorite. You want to make that community or that resident complex or whatever you're trying to do as entertaining as possible. But even doing that, with all the, the lighting and, the video that's going on, or stage presence, these things all demand bandwidth, and you're getting that reach. Again, we talked anywhere from 12 to 18 miles worth of reach. How easy is that? How simplistic is that? I can hit anything within that complex, no matter how big it is, and not have delays giving the features. I mean, years ago, if we could get dial-up for 56 kilobits, we were doing great. And then it became 1.5 was king, 1.5 megabits of service. I can't believe we settled for stuff like that. What we have and how spoiled we are today, as now we've migrated to, gigabit services everywhere, to 10 gig services being able to be fed over the same infrastructure, the same network. Where did this lie and where's it going to end? And it's simply changing out maybe an optical network terminal at the end, a small box the size of your home router, and maybe a card or just some optics at the OLT or optical line terminal end. So growth and scalability to me is really limitless. As standards grow and change, where's that next demand going to be? Will it be 25 gig demand? Will it be 40, 80, 100 gig? We saw optical transport explode to terabit worth of bandwidth between cities. Because why did you need to explode to terabit? Because of demands like this, where all the consumers are trying to grab as much bandwidth as possible just to be able to enjoy themselves, right? When they see lag and they see slow, they get frustrated. You're trying to improve that experience and give them more feature-rich environment. When you look at things from a managed service perspective, I think this, again, like, Chad mentioned before with the senior living community, they don't just want the ISP provider bringing you the end customer service. They want to bring it to the building and then try to wrap feature-rich services around that whole offering. So again, improve the service quality, improve that response time, just faster activation, right? I mean, years ago, trying to get people hooked up with services so they can communicate with the families. It's always tough when you have to bring a loved one, to a nursing home. And I think nursing home, maybe takes on a tough name sometimes. So the assisted living is more of a better term. It's more peaceful, more comfortable. You want it to feel like home, and you want to be able to stay in touch with your loved ones, and getting that activation quick, I think, is key from that. And then if there's any types of issues or problems, there's help on site. Having that help on site rather than reaching back out to the ISP that may not be able to get there in time. They'll do the best they can. We've known that for years. They do the best they can, but now it's created a whole new level of services that can be offered on top of it. The monitoring, whether it's of the ISP services themselves, the broadband that you're using, whether it's surveillance within the complex itself to create better security, to be able to pull that information up on your own tablet at home or your TV to see, okay, who's at the gate. Very quick and easy. Instead of having to build your own house with all your security devices, it can be locally managed for faster response from, maybe the security team that's on site, or bringing in the other utilities, the fire and police and rescue if need be, because you've got better availability to monitor, being able to reach different devices within the community, whether it's on the utility pole or the street light, or the gate. Just again, flexibility is kind of key for these things, to be able to offer over the top services. From a maintenance perspective, since we're using fiber optics, it minimizes that impact on maintenance, because you don't deal with EMI or RFI, so you're not getting that kind of interference. It doesn't corrode like copper. I don't have distance limitations like I do with other mediums like copper or coax. Coax can still be used, but again, the key, I think, is getting the devices and the services as close to the end user or end product that needs to be supported as possible is really the key. And it eliminates that constant rolling of a truck, or people putting out fires. You can now focus on growth. What's the next thing we want to offer in the community? How do we make things better in this complex? How do we improve student services, student security? Blue phones were the big things for years with college campuses. You can kind of see how that blue phone is morphing into something more than just the blue phone device. For emergency purposes, it's now the lighting, it's now the cameras, it's now the Wi-Fi standpoint. So bringing 1 gig or 10 gig to do Wi-Fi 6 or even Wi-Fi 7 as it comes out, probably going to head towards the 25 gig demand in that environment. Having a small device that can be put in there, fed by fiber without a huge cost or huge investment, improves that scalability to put those devices throughout that campus or throughout that building. So I think it's really key when you start heading down these roads to look at the possibilities of where things can go above and beyond. You always think, well, what can I put on this? And if you look back, it's really any device that takes an IP address, right? Now it's any device that might need PoE support as well. We can do remote powering to get crazy distances over networks. Again, it just really kind of simplifies things and gives you that nice overlay of services. I don't have to build separate networks to offer all of these different things. It's a convergence of networks over a single fiber, over a single optical line terminal, over a single ONT, and I can still isolate my different consumers with different VLANs and security features. So you can just do so much more today than you ever could before, and now wrap it all up into a nice managed package for your customers. Whatever you want to bring in for services from the far side, extend it out over a passive optical network so I can minimize the size, the power. Um, I can eliminate the distance issues, the RFI and EMI. So doing building automation, security surveillance, IP video. And it's just kind of amazing to see how IP video turned into signage. As you walk into these complexes, the information's just at your fingertips today. So, from what I've seen and heard in the real estate industry, just trying to make your community, your building, your complex that much more attractive to the consumers, gives you an edge over your competition time and time again. People demand and want more. They're paying good money for places. They want to be able to see what they can get. So as I keep on growing and I need to do with environmental controls, as we talked about access controls for building security, gates, again, RFI type trackers, just tons and tons of flexibility. And I can still keep things simple too. So, we're even showing emergency analog phones. So I'm doing a fiber built network being provided by an ISP out to my community, out to my building. And then I wrap a local area network around that and extend those feature rich services to all the end users, to all the end user devices. And I can tie it all together so that I can give everybody access to those different security features, and you're not constantly outlaying for something more. It's part of that HOA. It's part of that, business administration building, what they want to offer for. I'm seeing a lot of stuff popping up in the chat bar. I wasn't sure if we've got any questions or concerns coming up over the stuff that we've covered so far. I'm kind of moving along pretty quickly here.
Yeah, actually, Scott, I could add in some things on these slides. So when we discuss, assisted living facilities and multi-dwelling units and large residential complexes, what we're seeing now with passive optical LAN are these services being brought closer to the consumer, right? Previously, you would seek out your ISP service, and they would turn up your service at your house or wherever your building complex is. But now we're seeing these privately owned assisted living facilities, multi-dwelling unit owners, as well as these large residential complexes being built, and we're seeing them now providing privately owned networks providing these services. These customers are installing their own optical line terminals. They're providing their own infrastructure and optical splitters out to the end user closer. That's what's really creating this high availability, this faster bandwidth for the consumer, closer to the consumer, allowing much more features than you would typically get from an ISP, who really monitors and manages your network and your bandwidth, whether you're paying for a specific bandwidth rate and speed. Now these types of facilities are really not, some of them aren't even limiting or throttling that speed. They're giving you what it gives. And so that's what's creating a lot stronger market and challenging these ISP providers. Is now these privately owned complexes and residential complexes are doing. They're creating better networks for their consumers and their customers, allowing a lot more availability in terms of what they can do on the network with a lot more availability. And at some point, depending on the type of facility or a complex, if it's an assisted living facility, any type of network like this, they're really offering a lot more to their customers, whether it's to provide a revenue stream for themselves, now offering some form of triple play services for an assisted living facility, or they're providing their own internet services in these multi-dwelling units that have a Starbucks at the bottom floor, where they would typically hire an ISP for internet service. Now they're just contacting that privately owned owner of the complex in order to turn up these services. So we're really bringing these types of networks closer to the consumer and customer. And they're a lot closerly monitored and managed. So we're seeing a lot of these turn up, and I don't believe I believe we're going to see a lot more. So wanted to just bring that and add that in for you, Scott.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. Greatly appreciate that. I can't emphasize that enough as well. It's the new dynamic. It's been a big shift on how networks are built. It's not just bringing access, it's bringing the features that go along with that access. And I think you hit a really great key point. You're not buying a 5 meg up, 5 meg down service anymore. You're getting pretty much unlimited bandwidth, what's available. And the way PON does dynamic bandwidth allocation, everybody gets that look and feel of 1 gig all the time, as the system's constantly checking to see where can I bring faster speeds to users who need it. So there's a ton of flexibility behind how you deploy and what you can really offer above and beyond. And I like how it's now you've created almost like your own town within a town, right? It's your own, for lack of a better word, it is a community. What are the features within that community? How do you support the end users? It just really takes it above and beyond. And then you've got things like, that whole infrastructure protection. So taking additional third-party services and overlaying them on top of the network that you've now created. So is it a business? Is it, a campus where you're trying to offer better security within the campus to keep the students or the patrons protected from different environments? I mean, they say the White House is in one of the worst neighborhoods in the world, but yet it's the White House. And what has it got wrapped around it? A big fence. It's just kind of crazy where things can go. And it may not be that it's 100% necessary to have the security because of the environment around it. It's more for peace of mind of the individuals going there, knowing that there's less likelihood of something being an issue. So they're willing to pay a little bit more for that peace of mind to be able to rest at night. So being able to address perimeter fences and make sure that they're constantly secure and somebody's not trying to break in and steal cars, do damage equipment, or, heaven forbid, hurt somebody as they're walking along in campus. But, it's tying everything together, from the security cameras to, in building security. You're trying to protect the stuff that's in the facility, whether it's a research facility or just a warehouse, being able to protect raised floors. So are people going into things or places they shouldn't be going? And sometimes it's just, simply by mistake. It helps prevent a simple mistake turning into a big problem. So it's nice to see all the extra features that have been created, since now you have the ability to bring large amounts of bandwidth. And again, to emphasize Chad's point, as close to the end user or device possible. It's so easy to get there. We're dealing with lots of government facilities where they want to eliminate copper completely. They want fiber right to the device, right to the desk, whether it's Wi-Fi or not. Can I plug the fiber directly into the Wi-Fi device and eliminate as much copper as possible? That's where things are kind of headed. And these, passive optical networks let you get there. It just brings that kind of flexibility into the environment, which, again, it's that scalability and beyond. I think it's, it's a nice way to go. And as we look at, again, how does passive optical LAN, give you additional benefits, towards green or net zero initiatives as well? you look at it just from that smaller footprint, as Chad mentioned, I'm taking a small OLT and I'm combining and converging all these different features and services into it and using passive optical splitters. I'm getting more robust use out of minimal amount of fiber. So as you're building or overlaying a network, it's less infrastructure to deploy, which also speeds up your time of installation. I mean, how many projects run over on budget and time? Wouldn't it be nice to start reeling projects in a little bit, come in on time? So now you've, you know, under promised and totally over delivered. You're giving them bandwidth they didn't think they could ever have, and you're getting it done in a time frame much less than would have with traditional networks. Whether it's in a main data center, telecom room, or individual pathways, being able to, again, almost oversubscribe the media that you're deploying with that flexibility of the way the network physically works itself. We mentioned less material, there's less plastics being used, physically less infrastructure to support it. If I'm able to go out 12 to 18 miles and I want to support, security features or another building, hey, we got room. We can now start phase 2. Do I have to build a whole new network to do phase 2? Or is it simply just reaching out with fiber from the existing network and grow and scale because I can reach the distances I couldn't before? So I don't have to manage multiple sites. It's one OLT to manage. It's one IP to secure. It just simplifies that daily operations as well, being less physical equipment to use. The amount of energy that gets used is less. And even from, when you look at it from like an HVAC perspective, since it doesn't generate as much heat as traditional networks have, and you're now moving those Ethernet ports from the data telecom room as close to the end user as possible, you're dissipating the heat in a much larger environment, which gives you better flexibility for that as well. The life cycle, right? If I look at copper versus fiber, one, I'm short reach on copper as it is, plus it corrodes. Mice love eating up copper for whatever reason. It's just been a nightmare for ISP providers for years. So even they're trying to eliminate copper as much as they possibly can within their own network. So why would you want to build a network day one with copper when you can run fiber to just about anywhere with minimal impact? You look at that life cycle from a 7 to 10 year perspective in the copper world, whether it's the equipment or the copper itself due to corrosion, you're looking at fiber networks in that 25 plus year range. Once the fiber is deployed, unless act of God or somebody went out with a chainsaw, heaven forbid, and started cutting up pipes and conduits, that fiber on its own is going to last longer because it doesn't corrode. It's physically cheaper to buy. It's physically less effort to run. It's lighter weight. There's just so many benefits behind doing fiber. And then as technology changes, I don't have to rip and replace like we've had to do with traditional networks. It's simply just change out a piece of equipment at the endpoints. And you got to keep in mind when you're doing those change outs to upgrade, it's not an all or nothing upgrade. I can do things in a very planned approach, a phased migration. Maybe only certain places need 10 gig today, 25 gig tomorrow, 100 gig in the near future. I'm not required to rip and replace or upgrade everything and put a huge outlay. So from the investor standpoint, the building owners, the management company, that's huge for them as well, and their future operating expenses, not just the daily stuff. And then it's, we kind of summarize thing. It's really, like Chad mentioned, it's the high availability of features. What's going to attract your clients? What's going to bring more revenue in? I get better bandwidth experiences, Wi-Fi everywhere. I can put security cameras anywhere and I can support them with PoE from any aspect point. Lighting, whether it's, for PoE lighting on the street, in the buildings or the homes themselves, the information that's available at their fingertips, from digital signage to video conferencing, or my favorite, because I like to do it at home with the kids, the outdoor movie night, having that better broadband. We were talking prior to the webinar starting, especially when COVID hit and everybody was at home, there's more users in a confined area, all asking for bandwidth at the same time. So you need to have that, gig availability or beyond. Being able to provide that to your clients and your environment is so key. But now being able to wrap that into a managed service, so it becomes a better business case for billing aspects. What other things can I offer the community? And it can be managed simply by the HOA or the community admin or whatever that building administrator is going to be. Just, again, a lot more flexibility. I really like the RFID aspect, especially from the assisted living, the senior communities. I think that gave me peace of mind when I was dealing with elder family members moving into those kind of communities, knowing that they were safer, because if there was a fall or if there was a health emergency, it was a simple push of a button, or because they went down, the devices were able to track and notice the impact or whatever. It was quicker responses. So I knew that my loved ones that, maybe may have been a town away, or they may have been states away, that I couldn't get to quickly, they weren't alone. Somebody was going to be able to get to them faster. So the technology and the applications that now come over top of the bandwidth availability, I think is really, really key. And we're going to see more and more applications created around that, and keep in mind that longer reach, bringing, that emphasis that Chad mentioned, bringing the bandwidth that's needed. And it could be power as well, or both, to the end device as close to the users as possible. It just creates a much better experience all around. So for me, that kind of brings us right around to Q&A time. Like to open that up to Chad and our viewers.
Yeah, we did have a couple of questions come in, and I'm not sure if they came in a little bit early and a couple at the end. I'm not sure if we maybe answered those with those last few slides. I'll just read them off to you, Scott, if you can answer them. So first question is, how does this equipment compare to a typical ISP provider's equipment? It's kind of a couple of bullet points here: longevity, quality, and then in a typical complex versus the legacy installation is kind of what it reads off.
So I think that can be addressed from a few different perspectives. If you look back to, like, on the first slide that we talked about, how did the whole PON environment kind of get started? It was really in an ISP environment. So they're using similar, variety of different manufacturers that are all getting into this. And I think those numbers are growing and growing on a daily basis on, who can provide what, different initiatives that are out there. So, even today, the ISPs may be bringing service to this location over a PON network, but they're using it in a wide area perspective and maybe just not offering the managed service side. So then you're taking, what could be any manufacturer's PON being brought in as an ISP. And then once it's in your location, you're now taking those services as your uplinks coming in, and then you're tying it into your network and you're extending it out to every person and device, where the ISP provider may have only been providing it to the end user themselves and not giving you that network flexibility for all the other over the top services and devices. Or it could be still they're bringing service in on a MUX and offering a 10 gig pipe coming in, or just, the triple play from, the Xfinities, the AT&Ts, any mom and pop that, has started their own ISP as well. But it's just not tying or converging all the features together. Because now in a complex like, we were talking about, I could have 3 or 4 different ISP providers bringing services in, and then I, as the managing team and network, can blend all those different providers in and bring a variety of services. Does one provider give me better service, or am I using it as a backup? So you're trying to improve quality of service from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and I also want to mention on top of that is a typical ISPs using carrier grade equipment rated to 25 years. We're not really changing that standard at all. And moving to this, it's just another form of equipment, but it all is carrier grade equipment from the OLTs to the ONTs. And in terms of a legacy installation, if that's what might be going in this multi-dwelling unit, some customers are mandated to change out, those legacy switches over a period of time. And moving to a POL in these facilities, you would be installing that carrier grade equipment. So that's definitely a strong point to make. Another question that came in, we didn't really elaborate too much on the design side of how these are designed and installed in this course, but a question came in on how far or what's the distance can we reach to provide bandwidth to these users in these complexes.
Yeah, it's a great question. It feels almost limitless, but it's based on the optics today. With fiber, my reach and bandwidth really is limitless. But as I mentioned, based on the optics today, we're reaching out up to 12, and with some optics changes, possibly 18 miles from wherever the OLT, the brains of the system, are housed to that end device. So these communities can be very expansive. And as we mentioned earlier, I can continue to grow that phase 2 and phase 3 as I'm building more and more of that community or that complex without having to rebuild, without having to overlay an entirely new network. It's just another piece of fiber out to the new phase that's being deployed or expanded upon. So it's pretty flexible.
Okay, and then one more question here, Scott. There are several approaches that can provide the services you described. Can you compare a POL's approach with other forms of approaches in terms of, I assume they mean by approaches with the services and devices, probably bandwidth. Can you compare a POL's approach versus a different approach, maybe by an ISP or another provider?
Yeah, again, we're looking at things from the complexity of how do I minimize the number of networks that have to be deployed. The networks are more virtual in this aspect because I can converge so many different services, like we showed on a couple of previous slides, different offerings by addressing it as separate VLANs. It doesn't necessarily have to be a separate network where the ISP may be limited based on the user's environment. Again, because they're typically addressing one customer at a time instead of a group. So the overlaying of all the extra services that you can do in a managed services we were trying to discuss here versus what the ISP is doing. I think the ISP might have a harder time doing a complete manage of services. I know they do offer a lot of things and they're trying to consolidate and grab more of the market. But with that explosion of broadband everywhere and all the different, countries that are jumping on that bandwagon to get high availability out there, it's really demanding new service providers and, new solutions to kind of help that along. So a lot of the ISPs are still kind of, I hate to say stuck, but they're bringing the services in, so you've got the uplink, but it's harder for them to extend it and then be as responsive to manage. If you're using other types of networks within the campus or the facilities, if they're fiber-based, I think that's key for anything. Passive optical networking, I think, maximizes the fiber base without having to overlay or expend or use too much fiber, versus other traditional type networks that would then typically extend over copper. They'd be more multi-mode rather than single mode. Maybe they are using a lot of multi-mode, but they're going to use single mode, but they'll use a lot more of it. So I think your cost structure can be different as well, where passive optical networking is really trying to flatten that layer 2 network. It's really trying to drive down the amount of equipment you need to deploy and drive down the amount of infrastructure that needs to be deployed. And I think that's key too, the infrastructure portion. If I'm running a bundle of fiber and there's dark fibers there, those dark fibers can be used for other services as well. So you're getting, again, more bang for your buck within that highway that you built throughout the campus or community. If you want to add anything there, Chad, in case I kind of answered that question, feel free.
No, I think you got it. I hope we answered it properly, but I think we're good. That was it for the questions that came in though, Scott.
Very good. Well, then I'd like to
And
thank everybody that joined us today. Appreciate your time. Hopefully you find this beneficial. Like Chad had mentioned earlier, we're seeing more and more of these types of complexes, communities, whatever you want to call it, but really kind of driving a managed solution. That's coming up more and more, and I don't see that going away. I see it probably, expanding with newer features and, again, newer applications being added into that mix of managed services. So with that, again, we're all about advocating education and global adoption. We're hoping to shape that optical LAN industry, try to bring new technologies into the communities, and again, promote, evangelize, really, how do we get the word out of building better networks, if you will. Please take a look at our website if you could, www.apolanglobal.org. We've got a lot of complimentary materials on the website, and we can be reached a variety of different ways. And as Chad mentioned earlier, these presentations that we do will always get posted to YouTube for future reference. Feel free to reach out to any member. Once you get into the website, you'll see a variety of different companies that have all joined together to try and help move these products along and make people aware of what's available to offer better features and services. With that,
yeah,
we
and
say thank you.
and to add to that, the technology committee has started a forum on the website where committee members are posting various things. It's new to the website, so if there's any information or specifics out there that may be requested, don't hesitate to jump into the forum and ask. That'll be viewed by all of our committee members, and I'm sure we could find an answer for any questions, but definitely something new to add. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.